Okay, so Lincoln was very aware of what was going on in Mexico. He was very, very concerned about the. I'm talking about. I'm jumping ahead to June of '63 when the French army captures Mexico City. It forces Benito Juarez on this epic journey. Juarez goes into San Luis Potosi. Then he goes into Monterrey. And ultimately, Juarez goes all the way up into what is now Juarez, Mexico, right across the river from El Paso. He goes all the way up into Ciudad Juarez. And basically, he's being chased by the French army all the way into the very northern tip of Mexico, right across the Rio Grande from El Paso, Texas. It's kind of interesting. uh, the French were hoping that Juarez would cross the Rio Grande into Mexico because if he did, that would have meant that he had given up his presidency. So Juarez really had to be careful. But it's pretty amazing the story of Juarez after June of '63 and his, like I say, this epic journey where he's being chased by the French into the far reaches of the Mexican north across the river from El Paso. Really, I think an amazing story. And Juarez is actually going to finally win this thing, but he shows real toughness, real tenacity, as did the people of Mexico, who most of whom were quite loyal to him. Okay, so let's go back to Lincoln. So June of '63, the the French army captures Mexico City and effectively take control over central Mexico. It's going to take them a while, the French, to establish control over the Mexican North, Matamoros, for instance, or the Northeast, right across from Texas. It doesn't happen overnight. But this is still a huge moment. The French army has captured Mexico City, and they've driven the elected government of Mexico out of Mexico City. Lincoln is very concerned about this, and think about the timing. It's really interesting, and I hope I'm not bragging too much, but I think I'm one of the first historians to really put this all together, the timing of it, because this happens just a couple of weeks before Gettysburg and Vicksburg. So there's a lot going on in North America in June, July of 1863. So, as you know, uh, Vicksburg and Gettysburg are Union victories. But I just have written an article which I'm publishing next year, and I talk about after Vicksburg, after Gettysburg, Lincoln immediately shifts his attention to Mexico. And he actually says a couple of times that there's no more important section of the U.S. Civil War than the Texas border, because that's the part of the Confederacy that, of course, borders with Mexico. And it's pretty incredible when you see this that Lincoln's first priority after Vicksburg, after Gettysburg, is he wants to get troops to South Texas to make sure that the French army doesn't invade Texas, that the French and the Confederates don't establish too close a relationship in South Texas. And he says it a couple of times to his top generals, and I have the smoking gun evidence. It's in the documents. Lincoln says that the Texas Mexican border is the most important spot in the Civil War after Vicksburg, after Gettysburg, in the summer after Vicksburg and Gettysburg. Um, Pretty amazing to run across that. And again, historians have just ignored that. So Lincoln, he wants Grant to send troops to South Texas, to the Rio Grande, and he writes Grant a letter. And what Grant wanted to do after Vicksburg, Grant wanted to send the Union Army to capture Mobile, Alabama. And the reason for this is Mobile, Alabama, which of course is east of New Orleans, kind of between New Orleans and the Florida Panhandle. Mobile, Alabama was still a significant Confederate port. And goods were coming in, smuggled goods were coming in from Europe, and some cotton was getting out, even though there was a blockade in Mobile. It wasn't like it was before the war in terms of commerce. The Union blockade did retard commerce, cotton going out and goods coming in, but it wasn't airtight. And so there's also, as was often the case, there was a railroad that went through Mobile as well that provided mobility for the Confederacy in terms of the Confederate Army and also supplies. And Grant just thought, okay, this is the next step. This is the next logical step. I'm going to capture Mobile. And Lincoln writes Grant a letter and says, no, you've got to put your Mobile, Alabama plans on hold. I want you to take an element of your army and I want you to send it to Brownsville, Texas. I want you to keep an eye on what the French are doing. And Grant is not very happy with Lincoln. And if you read the letter, Lincoln doesn't order Grant, but it's an order. And, it's Lincoln kind of pretties it up, but basically Grant gets the message. And he sends a note back to Lincoln. He's not happy about it. And again, that's kind of between the lines. But Grant's a smart guy. Lincoln had supported him before the Vicksburg when everybody else had kind of decided that Grant was no good. And Grant stops the Mobile campaign. So it's very interesting, and again, historians have not really picked up on this, that Grant's plans after Vicksburg especially were stopped, were changed by Lincoln's focus on the French in Mexico and by his desire to get American troops on the border with Mexico. So what happens is that Grant sends ultimately about 5,000 or 6,000 Union troops to Brownsville in November of 1863. Late October, early November 1863, and these troops occupy Brownsville. And I will have to say that the threat of the French in Mexico doesn't materialize in the way that Lincoln had feared. I think Lincoln was really afraid that the French might send up troops into Texas. He didn't really know what the French were capable of. But as I had said earlier, it takes the French, they're not really able to deploy troops into northern Mexico. Mexico's big. It's like over 1,000 miles between Mexico City, or around 1,000 miles, and say Matamoros or Laredo. It's a long way, and there's a desert in between. It's not easy. And northern Mexico has always complained about being isolated from Mexico City, from the center. So anyway, basically, Lincoln's worst fears about what the French might do after they capture Mexico never really came to fruition. But what we do know that happened is that once the French do get into northern Mexico, they occupy Matamoros in September of 1864. You do have a robust trade between French-occupied Mexico and Texas, which had actually been going on for the entire Civil War. So the French allow it to happen. Now, but what's interesting to me is the timing of to go back to 63, the timing of the U.S. troops going into Brownsville, because I'm convinced that Lincoln is thinking very, very seriously about what's going on in Mexico, and I'm convinced that it's reflected in the Gettysburg Address, again, in ways that historians have not picked up on, but I'm going to talk about in the next podcast.